Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and today I have a special treat for you. Today is this month's patron pick. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, and the topic that they voted for was to cover the human side of judging. Some of you may know that this year marked my 10th anniversary since I was certified as a judge, so I was really happy that a topic like this got chosen because it's a great chance for me to review the judge calls that have had the biggest impact on me, specifically the ones that are interesting for reasons other than the rules or the policy interactions, but rather the human interactions that I had. And I suppose the one to start with is the very first one. I know I've told this story on the channel before, but it really just is so foundational to me as a judge that I'm going to go over it one more time. This would have happened in the earlier mid-2000s when I was still a new Magic player. I was at a pre-release, which if you don't know, pre-releases back then were a lot bigger than they are now. It wasn't every game store got a pre-release. It was one pre-release per state. So to get to this tournament, I had to drive for 2 hours to get to Indianapolis. Well, actually that's not true. My dad had to drive for 2 hours because I didn't have my driver's license yet. Huge shout out to him. I really appreciated that, much more than Teenage Dave was probably able to express at the time. But anyway, that's the setting. Basically a sealed Grand Prix, but with regular rel and a staff of several judges. I walked by the judge area around lunchtime and I saw a bunch of pizza boxes. This is before I really even knew what a judge was or what they did, but I was intrigued. So I heard that the pizza was for the judges and I asked one of them what I had to do to become a judge. And the one who answered said that I had to pass a rules test. It was pretty hard. I would probably fail. If I had more self-confidence, I would have asked to take the test then and there and probably passed it. But I didn't. The first personal experience that I had with a judge was a negative one, and it turned me off from ever wanting to join. Even almost 20 years later, I still regard a careless offhand comment as a touchstone and fundamental piece of my judging philosophy. Here's the crazy part. There's no way that the judge who said that to me knew or could have predicted how big the impact would be. In fact, it's probable that judge wasn't even as rude as I remember, and that my negative emotions regarding this episode made it seem worse. None of that matters though. The fact is, it did affect me that way. It doesn't matter if you intended to ruin someone's day or their tournament or their judge career. As a judge, you potentially have that power. So you need to be aware of it. Whether you like it or not, you're always on as a judge, and anyone who knows that you're a judge is always looking at you as a representative of that community and of Magic players as a whole. It doesn't matter if you're on a break, if you're not working in a tournament, or even if you're not playing Magic. If you are in a spot where Magic players see you doing something unprofessional, it will reflect poorly on you and poorly on the program, whether that's fair or not. As a semi-public figure, I'm acutely aware of this, and I try my very best to embody the ideal judge persona, no matter how exhausted, hangry, or annoyed that I might be. Another crazy part of this is that judge has no idea I still remember this interaction. You're always on as a judge. Maybe I'm the reason someone never wants to be a judge. I'll probably never know either. The next story is from my first time traveling to a foreign country to judge. And no, I'm not counting GP Toronto for obvious reasons. I'm talking about my trip to Sao Paulo. So for this story, I think it's important to have a little bit of context. About a year earlier, I was at Grand Prix Las Vegas, a Modern Masters sealed extravaganza that was comfortably the largest Magic show up to that point in history. One great side effect of being so big is it required a lot of judges. Experienced judges from all over the world descended upon Vegas, giving an unprecedented opportunity for cultural mixing. I got to meet so many judges who I'd never met before. While I was talking to one of them about the differences between large events in the USA and South America, he told me that I should come down and see for myself. Up until this point, I had never seriously considered that as a possibility. I mean, sure, I knew there were other judges who did it, regularly even, but I'd never thought about doing it myself, principally because there was no need. There's about half a dozen large event cities within a 3 to 4 hour drive from where I live, so I had plenty of opportunities to judge without needing to get on a plane. But then I realized something. I was already interested in traveling, and getting to do so while being subsidized by my hobby was an ideal setup, especially when I considered that I would probably spend most of my time at the destination trying to play Magic anyway. At that time, I made a pact with myself that I would allow myself one vacation GP per year, counting the costs of such a trip against the money that I made judging actually profitable events. If you saw me at Magic Card Barcelona this past year, that's why. And with that resolution, I began a year of studying Portuguese in preparation for my first trip to the Southern Hemisphere. Perhaps my colleagues did realize the effects that these words would have on me, but I doubt it. Now, that's already a great story. I mean, it has everything. A hero, dramatic realization. It's even a nice foil with that first one that I had. But that's all just background for the real story that I'm going to talk about. See, I learned some Portuguese, but not really enough to be really fluent. My contact assured me that this wouldn't be a big problem because a lot of Brazilians speak English, but it still had me kind of worried. I hadn't gotten a lot of opportunities to practice listening and speaking, so while I could read and understand basic Portuguese alright, I wasn't confident in my ability with an oral setting, which, is pretty key to what a judge would be doing. So during the Uber ride from the airport to the hotel, I was able to hold a basic conversation with the driver, albeit with some difficulty, which I nonetheless found very encouraging. At the event, everything started pretty smooth. I was shocked by how much English there was in the announcements and the conversations. For reference, if anybody is considering going to a Magic event in the United States, don't expect anything to be in any other languages. Even when I went to Grand Prix San Antonio, which has a sizable Spanish-speaking population due to its proximity to Mexico, I don't recall seeing much in the way of Spanish language signage or certainly Spanish language announcements. And I was kind of expecting the same sort of thing in Brazil, with everything being in Portuguese and needing to work it out for myself if I didn't understand something. But it was actually a lot easier than I had anticipated. Even the judge meeting was held in English, with my team lead being the judge who had invited me. The first few calls that I took, the players noticed that I wasn't from around there and asked their questions in English. The format was sealed and the players had an option to get English language product, which means that even if I had to read a card, there was a 50-50 chance that I could just read it normally. Even with Portuguese product, I had at least learned the Portuguese equivalents of some of the Magic game terms, so I could read these with a little bit of effort. And then it happened. I responded to a judge call where the player didn't speak a lot of English, and he asked if I could speak Portuguese. And I said, yeah, I understand, but if you can talk slowly. I was able to understand maybe 75% of what he said, and I could piece together the rest based on context and knowing how Magic works. This was a tricky call, not a simple rules question where all I needed was a yes or a no, perhaps with a brief explanation. One of the players had done something against the rules, and I had to communicate what would be done to fix the situation and issue a penalty. After a brief interview with the players, I had my ruling and I was ready to deliver it. Once I made it though, the player appealed my ruling. So I went to get the head judge, known in the community for being a polyglot who is highly experienced in international settings. After talking to me and both the players, the head judge affirmed the interaction and the penalty that I had given, but overturned the fix. For those who are curious, it was a game rule violation, and the point we differed on was whether or not to back up. Me and the head judge talked about the ruling for a while, and I definitely agreed that he was right to overturn me. After spending some time thinking about it privately, I concluded that it wasn't my communication, investigation, or rules and policy skills that were lacking. Rather, the added strain of making a ruling in another language had overloaded my brain and thrown off my analysis. Before this, I didn't even realize that was a problem it was possible to have. But I guess I do now. As a judge who takes great pride in his rules and policy knowledge, every time I miss a ruling, for any reason really, it really stings. But I'm still glad that I had this experience because it gave me a fuller picture of everything that really goes into making a ruling. Okay, so for the last story that I'm going to share today, and this one takes place at a state champs event. If you don't remember those, it was basically a mid-level, maybe a couple hundred players, competitive REL event. And I was walking through the room and I saw a player play a Colony Garden. And this player evidently did not have a 0-1 plant token because I saw him reach for his sideboard and grab a card out of it and put it into play face down. Okay, so brief PSA, please do not do this, especially at a competitive REL event. Anytime a judge sees something like this, we get very sad. We get these horrible visions of the player putting the token into their graveyard after it dies rather than back in their sideboard, and then that player is going to play a Praetor's Council and return that sideboard card to their hand and not notice until after they play it and 3 turns have gone by. And I know that you're too smart to ever do that, but judges have to treat everybody equally. So that means we can't just give the players who would never make silly mistakes like that a free pass. Okay, so jokes aside, let's recap. Players using a sideboard card as a token. Your goal is to get the player to stop doing that. Take a moment and think about how you would approach this. The main challenge with this call is that the player likely doesn't see anything wrong with what he just did. So in his mind, you're probably just interrupting the game for no reason. So whatever approach you use needs to take that into account. The other issue is that if you just go up and tell the player to stop using the sideboard card as a token, you still have a problem. Namely, the player still doesn't have an actual token, and now that you just said that, he can't use the thing that he was using. From the player's point of view, we just went from having a minor inconvenience to having an actual problem. In other words, a judge intervening actually made things worse. So what I did is I went to the scorekeeper and I got a piece of scrap paper. I cut it to approximately Magic card size and drew a cartoonish picture of a sunflower on it. Then I took it to the player, explained why judges don't like seeing sideboard cards used as tokens, and asked him to use mine instead. This simple extra step shifted the judge from being the source of a problem to the source of a solution, and the player bought into that solution, swapping the token in with no protest. Now, that's already a pretty big win for the judge in my book, but not anything too crazy. What makes this my favorite judge call is what happened a month or so later at a different event in a different state. While I was walking the floor, I caught something out of the corner of my eye and I had to investigate closer. Sure enough, it was the same player playing the same deck using the same cartoonish sunflower token that I drew for him. He even put it in a sleeve to protect it. In that moment, I received something that's pretty rare for a judge: objective, incontrovertible, physical evidence that I had done a good job. It's a wonderful feeling. It's something that I hope every judge can experience at least once in their career. With a channel devoted to rules and policy interactions, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. No ruling takes place in a vacuum, and there are lots of factors that make a call more interesting. Unlike rules and policy knowledge, there's basically no cap on the amount that human skills can factor into a ruling and improve you as a judge. When I look back on how much I've learned in the last 10 years of judging, it makes me really excited for what the future will bring. But that's all I have for you today. Join me again next time for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.